everyone. We are on lesson 7. We did not finish lesson 7 up last week, so raise your hand if you need lesson 7, and then raise both hands if you need lesson 7 and 8. So raise one hand if you need lesson 7, both hands if you need 7 and 8. These were, all right, she just needs 8, so I maybe made that more complicated than it needed to be. I don't know what to tell you. All right, I don't know what to tell you. Just when Jason comes, tell him what you need. 9 is not available yet until Wednesday. 6 and 7 are in the back. And what I did on the website for the particular lesson that we're covering, I've went and uploaded the lesson for that week. So if you want a past lesson, lesson 4, you just go to the website where lesson 4 is the recording of lesson 4, and there's going to be a PDF of the outline, so you can download that anytime you want. Yes, it's after. It has to be uploaded to the website first. And I always mail them out. I try to. I email them out to everybody. Earlier in the week, I emailed 7 and 8 back out to you guys so everybody would have it. So for those of you who are regulars, there's no excuse for you not having your lesson filled out and ready to give us all kinds of great comments and insights. So while we're talking about it, all right, so if you do want to make a comment, just make sure you raise your hands. We have 2 microphones that come around to you. Take a microphone, speak into the microphone so that we can all hear you and they can hear you online as well. Last week we started our lesson on just basic principles of parenting. This is a general quarter on the family. We're talking about all kinds of different elements of the family. Later on we might specialize and talk about parenting in itself, talk about marriage in and of itself. But right now this is an overall view of the family and all the relationships that we have with the family and how we ought to treat one another. Herb led us in our second lesson. Our second lesson was so critical. It is applying the golden rule to your family. So there's no better rule that has ever been communicated to mankind about how to get along with people other than the golden rule. And that rule applies how we treat our husband, how we treat our wife, how we treat our children. All of this applies. So we're dealing now with basic principles of disciplining and parenting your children. Actually, the next lesson, lesson 8, is specifically about discipline. So we're really dealing at more of an overview, other principles of parenting that we can talk about, ones that come from the Bible, obviously, but things that we can talk about with one another. So we're on lesson 7. We're on the section number 2, the foundation principles that I've set up, points 4 through 6. We're on brick number 4, and that is to start with the end in mind. When you have kids, you got to figure out what is the end goal of these children. What am I trying to accomplish as I raise these children? We're not trying to raise obedient toddlers only. I know a lot of people who have raised obedient toddlers, and that's it. All right, so that's not all we're trying to do. Do we want our toddlers to be obedient? Absolutely. But is that the end goal of parenting, just to make sure that while they're toddlers, they learn to obey? No. It is not to raise straight A teenagers. That is not the end goal of parenting. We're raising future adults who love God with all their heart, mind, and soul, love their neighbor as themselves, have dedicated their life to serving God. They make wise decisions. They contribute to society, and they're able to pass God's faith, God's stories, God onto their children. So that is really what we're looking at when we have kids. It's not, don't get lost in the moment of the teenage years or even in the toddler years. Try to always keep in mind what the end goal of the parenting is. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6, this should be in your outline. It says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And what I want to emphasize from that particular passage, training up shows intentionality. It shows direction. From the very beginning, you are intentional about what you're doing with your children. And what you're intentional about is the outcome. You want positive outcomes. You want to turn them back over to God. One of the principles we've already talked about is that we must remember when we have children, they're not really our children. They are God's children that we have stewardship over for a little while. We have the time to train them to give them back to God. So a couple of things there. The goals would include, We're trying to help them develop a personal relationship with God. We don't want them to have our faith when they leave our house. We want them to have their own faith. We want them to have their own relationship with God when they're adults. That's what our goal in all of this is. We want them to have wisdom and discernment. The verses are there, Proverbs 1 and verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. We want them to have a certain level of independence and responsibility. Sometimes parents want to, hold their kids. We don't want you to live too far away from us. We don't want you to move, we don't want you to be, we want to be able to drive to you, all this good stuff. At some point, the goal is for them to be able to leave and be independent of you and to start their own family and have their own family. And eventually, still need you for guidance and wisdom and all this good stuff, but be able to make decisions on their own because you've trained them that way. Always come back to you for guidance, come back to God mostly for guidance, but be able to be independent people, not dependent on anyone or not depending on you as well. We want them to be responsible. We want them to pass on their faith to the next generation, our grandkids, right? You're training them to be able to raise your grandkids in a way that brings them to the Lord. And I know that sounds like a lot, and it is. Sometimes, I tell you, parenting can be overwhelming. But we got to sit back. It's going to be more overwhelming, and we don't keep the end in mind. We don't know what we're shooting for when this is over. So Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 9 says, "Only take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life, and teach them to your children and your grandchildren." So that's our responsibility. And there's the whole section we'll talk about a little bit later about a grandparent's responsibility in all this. Because grandparents have huge responsibilities in the family. And so we'll talk about that in another lesson. So the next discussion question we have there, what are the goals as a parent to you? What were your goals as a parent that we haven't already talked about? And then how hard was it to always parent with the end in mind instead of just trying to survive the day? I mean, how many of you there are some days you're just trying to survive? All right, when you were raising your kids, I'm just trying to get past this day or past this phase. And I warned us a little bit about that as far as enjoying everything about parenting. I confess that parenting overwhelmed me sometimes, and I did not enjoy the process as much as I should have. And so I'm encouraging you to enjoy the process. So what do you have here? Raise your hand, get a microphone to you. This is your chance to show your wisdom to the rest of us. Share your wisdom to the rest of us. We have a lot of people who still have young kids in this room. A lot of people who are just starting this path. So a lot of people who have successfully raised. All right. Who's speaking to the microphone?
I'm going to be brave.
All right. Good job.
And especially because most of you, well, especially Dwayne, knows Daniel since the time he was a little kid and how squirrely he was.
Amen.
So I don't know. I think my best wisdom and advice in your goals as parents, if I was going to, is that they're going to make mistakes. Allow them in that process to make those critical thinking skills and the guidance that it needs spiritually when you're doing those things. And the other thing for like preachers' kids or leadership children with shepherds and with children that are still being guided, teenage years, those kinds of things. For congregations and for parents to remember, they're not going to be perfect. You weren't perfect. They aren't going to be perfect. And one of the questions my daughter said to me when her first baby was born is, how am I ever going to teach her to not do the things that I've done? And I said, you will never be able to teach her those things. So they're going to make those mistakes. They're going to be painful, but allow enough forgiveness like God forgives us and give them a lot of love and grace along the way.
All right. Thank you very much. Good comments. We had Joe has something. Yeah, I think very good thoughts. Our kids are all going to mess up. And that is a scary concept. When you think about this, when you had your kids, you probably never thought about this, that at one point in their life, they are going to be separated from God. Right? They're going to be separate. They're going to sin and be separated from God. That's not going to be the total outcome, hopefully. We got to help them see how to get back in that relationship with God. But that's a scary thought. And our kids are going to make all kinds of mistakes. We've made all kinds of mistakes. We don't, if your main goal is perfection, raising your kids to be perfect, you're in a heap of trouble because your kids are not going to be perfect. The overall outcome may be great, but there's going to be a lot of mess up along the way. All right, Joe?
Yes, so of course, to rear, God-fearing children and God-fearing adults. And I would echo what she said. I mean, for me, I think I did pretty good on the thinking part, helping our sons think through things and analyze things, and they made their mistakes, and sometimes it's the mistakes that you allow them to make that's the discernment. I don't think, just personal reflection, I was really good. I was, don't do this. I was too particular about that. I don't think I showed them the grace that I could have, perhaps. I'm not saying I had no grace, but I think in reflection, I may be a little too hard. So, not to jump into the grandparent, having grandchildren, my perspective is a bit different because of that. I'm not Liliana's father, I'm her grandfather, so how that relationship's different. But so at least from our perspective, I fortunately had Susan who would, sort of soften me and say, hey, you might want to think through this before you go down that path. So when I think, what is your goal to raise God-fearing parents? But I think the thing that I would bring out of it is working together with your spouse, because he or she will bring something to the table that will also enrich the child in a way that you can't.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right. Speaking of that, Will's next.
Sorry. I'm just glad I was able to go at all. From a statistical standpoint, I don't have as much to say on experience as a parent, but here's what I've come to learn as far as what my goals would be as a parent. Kids. I'd pretty much want to make sure that whatever I'm teaching them, they can be hard things to talk about, but not hard to discuss with them, making sure that whenever it's something that they might not be fully on board with, you get to know, like, you speak into them what they're probably thinking, and then reel them back in onto what's a little bit more important, so subtly and so casually that they walk away with a new perspective being infused into their brain instead of being spoken at. It's something I've been seeing a lot of with parenting tips online, and I hope that's something I can incorporate in the future.
Okay. So parenting is a whole system of things. It's not just in the moment. And sometimes the best learning is not necessarily in the moment. It's as you go along and people are able to see those principles acting out in their life. Very good. Linda?
So like you said earlier, we want them to have their own faith when they leave the house. And so one of the things I think is important to us is they don't get scared off by the first pushback that they get, that they are able to stand firm in what they believe when the world starts coming up against them. I don't want them to be afraid. And I don't want them to be ashamed to share their love and their faith in God when that time comes. I don't know if we're doing it right. We're still in the middle of this, but I know that when my kids hear their friends don't go to church, I've overheard both of them, first thing they do is come with us. Come here. Hey, we have this great congregation we go to. You should come. And they're not afraid to share that. And they're not afraid. I got this from my mother. She always brought God into everything since I was a baby. Look at that flower. Oh, God made that flower. And she puts God in everything. And I'm trying to do that with the kids so that when they're faced with questions on science or they're faced with questions on like behavior, why do we do things? Why is the world the way that it is? It always points back to God so they know where the foundation of everything is when they're not with me. hopefully they go back to that foundation.
Very good. So lay the foundation that God's in charge of everything. God made everything. God, over and over and over again. And then help them be able to withstand that first onslaught of their faith when they do leave home. So give them enough information, enough ability to stand for that, and then to share that gospel with others. One more, and then we'll have to move on. Carrie Ann?
Oh boy, that's a lot of pressure. Obviously, our kids are still young, but as they grow, one of our big goals is for them to feel comfortable talking to us about everything. There was a lot of trouble that I got into as a high schooler and like in college and whatever, that if I would have felt comfortable sharing with my parents, it would have saved me a lot of hard mistakes. And I think that it was a lot of shame. It was a lot of embarrassment. And I'm not at all blaming them for those mistakes. I take ownership, but I would like for our children to come to us and say, Mom, Dad, I did X, Y, Z. Now what? And then we hopefully will be able to guide them back to Scripture and show them that grace and love of the Father, and work through that so that they don't continue to make those mistakes. There's a lot of things that I could have done once and learned from, but I just continued to do. And like I said, I'm not necessarily blaming them, but hopefully having that open communication will help.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the hard things about parenting. It's to draw the line of right and wrong, and make that a stern right and wrong. All right, this is right, this is wrong. But then be gentle and loving enough that they know when they cross that line and they do what is wrong, they can still come back, and you're going to have a good conversation with them, and you're not going to write them off. I think it's hard, especially maybe for some of us Christians, hard to walk that line because we don't want our kids to make these huge mistakes. I've used this as an example. God's expectation is for everybody to be pure when they get married. That is God's expectation. As a parent, that should be your expectation for your kids, and there should be no other expectation for that, because that's God's expectation. But you want to have a relationship with your kids that is such that if they do something they shouldn't do, even if they were to get pregnant out of wedlock, you don't want them to be so afraid of you and the consequences of that they can't come to you and talk to you about that. And be Dad's going to freak out if I tell him this. I mean, he's never going to talk to me again for the rest of my life. They got to know, I really did something I wasn't supposed to do. And my mom and dad are going to be very disappointed in me, and rightfully so. But I know their heart. I know they love me. I know they are going to help me through this situation. It's even going to be shameful for them. I mean, so that's to me, I'm just telling you, from my perspective, all my kids are grown at this point. That's a hard line to get to where you can do both those things. Boom. This is right and this is wrong. If you do wrong, you've sinned against God. You've isolated yourself from God, so you don't want to do that. But be open enough that when you do that, when they do something that bad, that they can come talk to you. I think that's sort of what Carrie Ann was saying. So just be open in their communication, so they know no matter how much they mess up, they can come talk to you, and you're gonna be. And we'll talk about discipline probably maybe later on this time, and not next time. And this side, they know they might get disciplined, but they know that's going to be out of love, and you're going to be reasonable about that. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I'll tell you that for me, that's a tough line to draw, because I do want to be black and white. I want to make sure they don't do things they shouldn't do. But again, you also want to be open to when they do, that you can hug them and love them and accept them and do what they need to do. Does that make sense? It is, for those of you who still have young kids, that's something that you're going to have to figure out. Talk to one of these older families that have successfully raised adult children, and ask them. I hope that is one of the things that comes out of this, not only the sharing here, but sharing in other aspects of this. All right, so this next section down here is brick number 5. Kids learn more about God by how you live than what they say. Than what you say. All right, so the righteous man, Proverbs 20, verse 7, walks in his integrity. His children are blessed after him. Philippians 4 and verse 9 says, the things which you have learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 6, you shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk to them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, sort of what Melinda was saying, and when you rise up. Psalm 78, verse 4, we will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of God and His strength and His wonderful works, what He has done. So discussion question number 5 then is, can you give real-life examples when a parent's actions teach more powerful lessons than their words? You don't have to do specifically about you here. You can just, maybe you can throw your parents under the bus if they're not here, if you want. Jason, he's not going to throw anyone under the bus, though.
No, because I have no kids.
And your mother is here.
And she can still take me.
She can take you.
The one that's always interesting to me is, and it's not so much anymore with cell phones and stuff, but back in the day, folks, we used to have phones and they had cords and they were attached to walls. And there was no caller ID, so you didn't know who was calling. And a parent would have the child answer the phone, and they would say, "Tell him I'm not home."
Okay. All right. So that's a good example.
We tell children not to lie, and then we tell them to lie for us, and that's a problem because a lie is a lie. My dad used to say, he preached a sermon one time, and he says, "A sin is a sin is a sin is a sin." Well, a lie is a lie is a lie is a lie, even if it's a little white lie. And what they're learning is that, oh, mom and dad think you shouldn't lie, except for when I'm answering the phone, or except for, and that is problematic.
Yeah. Anybody remember the Andy Griffith episode where everybody's trying to sell their house? Yeah, you remember that? And Opie was trying to sell a bike, and he wasn't being completely honest about the bike. And his dad, Sheriff Taylor was telling him, you need to tell your friend that chain doesn't work like it's supposed to, or the brakes are messing up a little bit. He said, well, then he won't buy it. And then Andy's trying to sell his house, and the roof's leaking, and something else is making a noise. And he's basically doing the same thing he was telling Opie not to do. And of course, as that show goes on, Opie calls him on it. And Opie's trying to say, but Dad, you said the other day that noise is something really serious, or this roof is leaking like a sieve. What are you talking about? And so, and then he ended up not selling his house. But that was a moment for him. He realized I was holding my kids up to a standard that he saw that I wasn't living. And I think every single parent experiences that. At some point in your parenting, you will experience, maybe it's gossip, maybe it's anger, maybe it's lying, maybe it's not doing your Bible lesson, maybe whatever the case may be. There could be a lot of things that come into place there, but we've all been caught by our children not being consistent with our own lives. And if you think you're going to get through all of your parenting with never doing that, I'm going to say you're probably going to be wrong on that. Congratulations if you make it, but I don't think you're going to make it. It's just life. And so your kids are going to have to learn to forgive you along the way too. And it's going to be a great lesson for them. Mr. Herb.
I think what I wish I had done more, maybe even done, maybe I did, I don't know, but was to be vulnerable to my kids and to pattern this idea of what Carrie Ann was talking about, being willing to say to them, look, I messed up when it's appropriate. I realize there's some inappropriate times, but when it's appropriate to say, guys, I messed up, and to be willing to risk that in front of your kids, to show them the risk. I want to look at my notes. When you have nothing to gain by doing it and everything to lose, is pattern for them what you want, how you want that relationship to be back to you. And I think that living that is more powerful than talking about it.
Yeah, very good, very good. All right, Terry, and then we'll have to move on to the 8, because up here, Brenda has something. All right, go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, so one of parental actions that teach a powerful lesson is when you act justly to your own hurt. When the kids see you paying something to do the right thing, and then they come to you and they say, yeah, but Dad, Mom, that wasn't really right, that you had, that cost you this or that or whatever. But then you can tell them, yeah, but it was the right thing to do. And to me, that's very powerful.
All right, so when something costs you and maybe you could have gotten by without paying it or without doing it, but you did the right thing even when it was hurtful to you, and your kids see that, then that's a powerful way to teach them a good lesson. All right, Brenda, and then we'll move on.
My example to give and to share is that when I was little, maybe 6 or 7, my dad takes me to like the 7-Eleven or something, and he's in there getting something else, and I saw a piece of gum or something that I wanted, and I just grabbed it and went back out to the car, and he knew that he hadn't given me any money. So he's like, "Where'd you get that gum?" And I just said something stupid, I'm sure. And he's like, "You're going to go back in and you're going to apologize to that storekeeper for stealing that gum." And he made me go in by myself and say to that grown-up, "I'm sorry for stealing this, and I'm giving it back to you." Now, the guy reacted, he's like, "Oh, that's okay, honey. You can get," he was so charmed, I guess, that a little kid would do that. But it was still the shame. The shame is controversial because people don't want their kids to feel ashamed. But I actually did feel shame to have to go in front of that person and say, "I stole this." Yeah. And then the shame that I felt driving home, I just didn't even forgive myself. And he had done similarly when me and some other friends were out in the backyard, and we're throwing rocks or something. I can't remember why or what we were doing. So my dad comes out, "Hey, what are you doing?" We were throwing rocks at our neighbor's shed and denting it. And, we're all doing it. I was doing it. And he comes out, "Hey, what are you kids doing?" And those kids scattered. They just left. Shoo. The rest of the kids are gone. And I'm standing there. And he said, "You're going to walk around to that neighbor and you're going to apologize to them for denting and, bothering their shed." And I was like, that felt so undoable. And then the shame of knocking on that door and then saying, so I know shame is a controversial thing for parents to implement in their lives. I think some people would say, "Well, I would never want to shame my child." But the shame was important to know I was ashamed of what I'd done, and my dad caused me to feel ashamed. He made me confront that and deal with it immediately. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that made an important turn in my head from that point on, I just understood about stealing and ruining somebody else's property.
Now, your dad would have no leg to stand on if you saw your dad taking something from the grocery store.
Right.
Or if you saw him, "Hey, they didn't charge me for that, but that's okay." And so because your dad was honest and he didn't fall in that category, he was never throwing rocks and hurting other people's vehicles. Mm-hmm. And let's say he accidentally got in a fender bender in a parking lot. I had to do this one time, and this had been fairly recent. I bumped into a car, skinned it up, nobody was around. And I didn't want to go through the 3-hour hassle of calling the police and having them come out and do a report, blah, blah, blah. But I did it. I called the police. They came out. They did the report. And then so I ended up contacting the owner. This is my mom. I think my mom was here last time. It was maybe her view. And they were able, it was such a minor thing that I left a note to them and everything, and they buffed it out themselves. And they said, "Don't worry about it. It was no big deal, but thank you for filing the report." But so if your dad was guilty of any of those things, he would not have had the moral clarity to make you pay that up. So that's sort of our challenge, is to live at a level where our moral clarity is seen clearly by our children, so that when they violate a thing like this, they would know, Mom would never steal anything at the grocery store. Therefore, she's just in having me deal with that. All right, one more, Debbie.
I think one is teaching them respect for the elderly. Like, you go to a restaurant and you're sitting at a bench and an older person comes in, you get up and give the elderly person. I just think respect for the elderly.
All right, that's a very good one. So how you treat, if you, for instance, if you go to Disney World, you take that tram or whatever they call that thing, and you get on and a whole bunch of people pile on, and you stay seated, and there's elderly people, there's handicapped people, whatever the case may be, what are your kids learning in that moment? They're learning, hey, if I get first come, first serve, I got the seat first. Who cares how old these people are and how difficult their day has been? They shouldn't have come to Disney World if they didn't want to walk all day, right? So you get up and you stand up And you make your kid get up too, but it would mean so much more if you did it first and did it with them instead of, hey, you get up, kid. I'm tired too. So I think that's a good point where we can teach people. All right, we got to move on. So the next one is sort of similar to this, and it is brick number 6. You will make mistakes as a parent. Somebody introduced this last time. How you deal with your mistakes will matter more than the mistakes themselves. So Colossians chapter 3 and verse 12 says, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. You have the parable of the unforgiving servant. You have all kinds of examples about forgiveness in the Bible. Genesis chapter 50 and verse 20, but as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, so you can walk through failures. So there's a couple things we can discuss with this. When you do wrong to your children, you can apologize for that, and you should apologize for that. One that always hit me, and I had some friends that did not think I was doing right here, but have you ever overstated the punishment your kids were going to get for something? You are grounded for the next 478 years. You will never see the light of day. Okay? You as a parent, sometimes you do that. Out of it's not. I'm not saying it's right, but most of us probably have overstated at some point how we're going to punish our kid. And if you do that, people say, if you say it, you got to do it. I mean, you're teaching your kids a lot of lessons. If you say it, you got to do it. If you tell your kid they're punished until they're 18, they can't leave the room, well, you have to do that. You don't have to do that. I mean, you have to tell your kid, I really spoke because I didn't think. I said something that I shouldn't have said. And although you're going to be punished, I want you to know that what I did was also not correct. I responded in the moment out of frustration, and I said something that I shouldn't have said, and you're only going to get punished for 3 years. Whatever the case may be. Does that make sense? I think you have to be careful. I mean, if that's a habit with you, if you're always doing things and you're always having to walk things back, you have to work on that. You're setting a really bad precedent there, and you got to stop that. But on occasion, you're going to say or do something that is not correct. And you're going to have to walk that back and say, you know what? I did something I shouldn't have done. However you want to deal with it. I'm not going to judge anything, parent however you want to parent, but picking the line up in the old time when you could pick the line up and eavesdrop, when I was a kid, my mom could have picked that phone up on the other end and could have listened to what I was saying without me knowing it. I would advise it. I would have been, sort of feeling that was a violation of trust or freedom or whatever the case may be. You doing that without, and so if she wanted to do that and that was her way that she was going to do it, that was fine. But I think if you did something like that, you know what? I heard that. I shouldn't have heard it. But now that I've heard it, we have to deal with it. What you said to your friend, and I'm going to make it a habit not to pick it. Whatever. I hope you understand what I'm saying. You're going to make mistakes. How you deal with that mistake is going to be as powerful in their life as the mistake itself. All right, so let's open it up to you then. I think I have a question for that. All right, how comfortable are you in admitting mistakes to your children? And can you think of times where you've had to sit down and say, I botched that one. I really did something I shouldn't have done. All right, Jason has something.
Again, no kids, but I've talked to various people, including parents, and one of the things my little sister is always worried about being a good mom. And what I say to her is, you know how I know that you're a good mom? Because you're worried about being a good mom. Bad moms don't care. Bad parents don't care if they're good parents. So I would recommend that parents give themselves a little bit of grace. No one is going to be perfect. Dad wrote me a letter one time. He's like, quit focusing on being perfect. Only one ever was, and they killed him 2,000 years ago. So parents need to give themselves a little grace. And if you give yourselves the grace, I think you will have the heart to admit when you're wrong. David was not a man after God's own heart because he was perfect. David was a man after God's own heart because of how he responded when he was wrong. And again, if you give yourself a little grace, you trust that God has forgiven you, give yourself, it'll be easier to have that discussion.
Okay, all right. Daniel.
Yeah, so I think it's, well, at least for me, understanding children, especially girls, is different. So Piper and I are very similar in the way we think, and sometimes we shut down. So when I think she's shutting down on me is just her emotions going on in that. So it was just a few days ago. It was a dumb little fight, and it just got drawn out way too much, right? She was just not doing something I was saying, and it was very simple. We were just going over reading, and she would just flat out not do it. And I blew it up. It just got to the point where she was crying. I was telling Melinda to get home, and it was just out of control. After the emotions kind of calmed down, I went in her room and kind of apologized to her for kind of overreacting in the situation. So for me, it's admitting to the girls are differently especially for raising a girl, and their emotions are differently, and to understand what she's feeling in that moment is not always just an act of defiance. It's just figuring things out right now. So I need to give her a little grace in that too. So
okay, and then going in and having that discussion with her as a follow-up builds that relationship up instead of tearing it down. So what could have torn it down actually could be building it up. Phil?
Yeah, I think a lot of parents, at least for me it was, we look back, before we parent to our children, we usually look back to how our parents parented us. And if it was something we didn't like, we would say, when I become a parent, it's going to be different.
Never doing that.
It's going to be different. And it can be, but you have to fight those natural tendencies to want to fall in that default position, because that's what you grew up seeing. My wife and I both wanted to have real relationships with our kids, which required on our part a lot of honesty, directness. And when they would ask us questions, we would have to answer. And if there was a question they asked that I did not want to answer, I would tell them, I'm going to give you an answer, but not right now, because I don't think you're ready to hear it. Because in my kids' eyes, whatever I said that I did would be a license for them to do the same. And if it was something I didn't want them doing, or thinking they were free to do it, I didn't want them to get in trouble. So I tried to, but when I did make mistakes, and I can't remember all the details, but I do remembering failing to do it right. And I told my kids, look, one thing I want you to know is your dad's not perfect, and he doesn't expect you to be. And when I did that, I noticed in their face there was a calmness there. They didn't feel that tension that we normally feel as parents to try to be right all the time in everything we do. So I had to fight that urge to just say, I'm the parent. Yeah, I made a mistake, so what? I didn't want that. I wanted them to know, I wanted them to have the freedom to do that. And when they went off to college, I said, look, or when they went to school and to college, I said, you're going to see a lot of things, and you're going to do a lot of things you shouldn't do. And if you do, come back and talk to me about it. You're not going to get crucified for it. But I remember telling Brian when he went to college, and he still wasn't a Christian yet. He was 19. And he became one later that year. But before then, he'd gotten some real trouble with some other kids at school. And before he went to school, I knew things were going to happen. I know how kids act out when they're away from their parental authority and their network of support to keep them in line. And I said, son, I want you to know something. Before you leave this house, I said, your mom and dad love you no matter what. And I said, I don't care what you do that's really embarrassing or really bad or what trouble you get into. Just remember, you have a dad and mom that love you as you are, mistakes and all. And that's not going to change how we see you. And I think that gave him the right frame of mind to walk into that situation at college. So if he did mess up, he knew he wasn't going to lose his dad or his mom over it.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. All right, so I'm going to skip the review, I think. And so This is what I'm asking. What did I gave you 6 fundamental principles of parenting. We're going to look at discipline by itself on Wednesday. It might spill into next Sunday. What other principles have we not discussed? Basic principles that you think need to be brought up. We had several that we talked about. What did we miss? Yeah, 5 minutes. 4.5. I had to have missed. We had to have missed something. Joe has something. Just Joe's up here. Raise your hand high, Joe. There you go. Thank you, sir. Somebody else. Something. Just something that you feel is so important about raising kids, either that you did well or didn't do well, that you would like to share as a fundamental principle that sort of guided you. Joe.
Just like Phil said, we're not perfect because we're human beings. But even as the elders, we tell members as they would, elect to be part of this family. If we as parents or elders or anybody else messes up, don't give up on Christ. He's not going to make a mistake. He never makes a mistake, and he never gives up on you. So never give up on him. There's not a circumstance where you'll give up on Christ. Okay,
very good. And that could go along with what Phil just said about that moment where you have to, even when you make mistakes, say, you know what, I make mistakes as your father. I will. I'm sorry. I'm not someone who's perfect, but fortunately for both of us, we have a father who doesn't make mistakes. And we have a father who forgives. And we have a father who always is ready to have his arms open to accept us back. And so remember, when you mess up, not only am I going to accept you back because I'm your earthly father, but know that God's going to accept you back when you sin. So that, again, that's that line you have to figure out, as far as you don't want to be permissive and give them permission to say, oh, if I mess up, no big deal. All I got to do is say, I'm sorry. You don't want that, but you want to give them that lifeline, knowing that when you do mess up, I am going to be doing whatever I can to get you back. John? Who was first? Oh, Debbie did have it first.
I'll say an example like in high school. I think it's tough for kids in high school going to parties and all of this stuff. With my kids, I would never let them go unless I'd met the parents or something like that. And Mackenzie especially, she just thought that was ridiculous that I'd have to meet the parents before I would allow her to go to these parties. So when she was a senior, she says, I just feel like you don't trust me. And I said, Mackenzie, I do trust you. I know you know right from wrong. So I gave in and let her go to the party. The funny thing is, when she came home, or she texted me at the party, and she said, yeah, everybody here is drunk, and, the mother's taking the keys at the door and not letting them drive. And I just couldn't believe that a mother would be doing that. So I guess the fact that I trusted her enough that she felt comfortable enough to tell me, so I think in high school is where, kids want to go to these parties. They're popular parties and kids want to go to them, and, you got to trust your kid, but I would never let her go. And I did let her go to this one, and she came home and told me all about it, which I was happy about. So I guess it wasn't such a big deal for her to go to these parties after all when she realized that what all was going on there.
Yeah. So I think the idea of that, first of all, hey, you're not going to go hanging out with people we don't know. I think that's a good philosophy, a good strategy. There's too many things that could happen that you don't know about. But she's older, says senior, and so at that point she had a pretty firm foundation, and she was able to talk to you about that afterwards, which I think was good. All right, John, and then over here.
Well, Susan and I, we're both not parents, but we were both children. I think one thing, and I've, just hearing from certain people, is knowing the difference between an accident and rebellion, and when punishment is being dished out. And because that can leave, certain impressions, and it's like, well, this was an accident. Let's not be so quick to, serve up capital punishment. Let's reserve that for like rebellion.
Yeah, and as parents, those of us who have multiple kids, they're all different, right? So one of the premises we said, treating every kid the same by definition is unfair because all the kids are different. If you treated them all the same, you're treating someone unfairly because that person, as Daniel pointed out, is different. So some kids, might need for certain things, it might be a rebellious heart, might need a very stiff penalty. Some kids might just need a dirty look, right? Might just need a lecture, might just need, go think about what you've done and how you've sinned against God or how you hurt, whatever the case may be. Kids are different, and you got to know what is an act of rebellion here and what is an act of confusion. The Bible tells us, even all of us, be able to, all right, go ahead, Dave. I'll forget mine. Dave, what Dave's going to say way more important than me. Go ahead, Dave.
I just want to remind us that a parent's influence does not fade as the child grows older. It shouldn't fade. And if you've built a good relationship with your kids, they're still going to care very much about what you think about them. And their influence and the influence and the example you can still be is important.
Yeah.
My mom's in her 80s. A few months ago, I saw her and I said, we were talking. She goes, well, I got plans on Saturday. I need to go see to some of the older people in our congregation. But that's mom in a nutshell. So, and when she goes over, she cleans, she brings food, she does. So, our example that we have in our kids, I'm 62, and she still has an example.
Yeah, for sure. That is true. All right, everybody, we're going to, on Wednesday, lesson 8 on Wednesday. Be ready to talk about discipline and encouragement.